Good evening. Today is June 29th, 2021, and this is the 57th episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, Sargis Sangari. My guest today is a very trusted friend of mine, Clare Lopez. Clare is the president and founder of Lopez Liberty LLC, which is a mission to alert and educate Americans on a range of national security threats, international, as well as from the Islamic movements like the Muslim Brotherhood, and also collaboration amongst the ranks and file of the mission communists within the country. In 2020, Clare was named a senior analyst for Ravinia Associates, which is a strategic corporation communication firm that is based out of Virginia. From 2014 to 2020, Lopez served as the vice president for research and analyst at the Center for Security Policy. She has been a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research and a member of the board of advisors for the Canadian McKinsey Institute. Clare, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for coming back again. And today I know we're going to be looking at Iran with the selections that recently took place and also the linkages with the SCO. But I know you cover a wide range of articles and items on foreign policy, and it's good to have you back again.
Well, thank you, Sargis. I'm very glad to be with you, as always.
Clare, let's start with what's happened with the new elections, with the strikes, of course, that took place by the current administration against Iranian proxies in both Iraq and Syria. Give us a little bit of a background, how we got here, and under the current administration, what are the updates that you could give us as far as the talks about possibly a new JCPOA, and is this part of the leveraging against this new administration that's coming in Iran?
Well, the immediate context, of course, is the new, still rather new Biden administration in Washington, D.C. That took office about 6 months ago in January this year, 2021. And I think rather immediately, most leadership around the world, friends, allies, adversaries, enemies, and rogues, all alike, perceived weakness in the White House. And that meant different things for the various and different governments that we're talking about. But in terms of the Middle East, certainly in the Iranian regime in Tehran, that perception of weakness led to what I think we can all see is a ratcheting up of aggression, of belligerence, and of course, with the very recent now, as we say, selection, right, in air quotes here, selection of a new president, Ebrahim Raeisi, to take office in August. That would be in another month and a bit. From the predecessor, his predecessor, Hassan Rouhani, as Raisi prepares to take over the presidency in the Islamic Republic of Iran, already we can see, I think, an uptick in that, as I said, aggression and belligerence coming out of that regime. It's very obvious they know that they're dealing with a different White House than they had to contend with the previous 4 years when President Donald Trump was president. And so most recently, just as you mentioned there, Sargis, the Iranian proxy militias that are present all over the former Iraq, the former Syria, are ratcheting up their attacks, rocket and missile strikes, not just against, for example, Iraqi military forces, but more recently against American troops and bases also. Happily, thankfully so far, as I know, no casualties on the American side, But nevertheless, it was right to see the Biden administration just this past weekend mount retaliatory strikes along the border area between the former Iraq and the former Syria against the bases, logistics, munitions, intelligence bases of some of those Iranian proxy forces that use that border area as their launching pad, if you will, into the former Iraq and American forces positioned there. So while it's good to see the Biden administration take retaliatory action, it's too little, too late. And, you know, perceived by the Islamic Republic of Iran probably as rather minimal in terms of damage. It's certainly no President Trump strike against, for example, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force commander, Qasem Soleimani, as we'll recall, was taken out in a strike back in January of 2020. Nothing like that aimed at the leadership, not just low-level troop, militia forces positioned here and there, but the absolute leadership of the authors, of the sponsors of these militias, and that is Iran, and those are Iranian commanders.
No, it's based on everything you said, what's interesting is just a couple of weeks ago, Congress went ahead and actually voted in the House, at least for now, in order to remove a president's ability, in this case for the authorization of the use of multi-force, the 2002 version of it that was really geared towards Iraq for us to do operations there. And now you see that even the current POTUS went against his own party and actually still had to use the 2001 to engage those targets on the ground, not knowing in the future if he'll have that flexibility or ability. I guess from my perspective, I'm still, I know that initially, as you know, in Vienna, there were discussions that took place, and then we're looking at possibility where this administration still thinks it has a hope of striking a new JCPOA over the next few years. Some of the old individuals that had worked on the previous JCPOA under Obama are back into this administration trying to do the same. And I know that there's no difference between administration in Iran because, the current leader, president of Iran, was selected into his position. But is there anything we're missing here? Is there a possibility that if you have negotiated with the previous administration in Iran for a possible JCPOA, that over the next 40 days, when Raisi, probably around August 5th, becomes the full president of Iran, that you may have to go back to the negotiation tables? Does the administration understand those nuances, or is it just trying to strike any deal regardless of which administration strikes it with?
Well, here's the thing. This Iranian regime that came to power in a jihad revolution in 1979 behind the Ayatollah Khomeini at the time has never, ever wavered in its ultimate objective of achieving deliverable nuclear weapons. That program began under the Ayatollah Khomeini before he died in the late 1980s, and continued under his successor now, the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei. The program has been clandestine from the start. It was revealed in part not until 2002, when the Iranian opposition group, the Mujahideen Khalq, and its umbrella group, the political umbrella group, National Council of Resistance of Iran, blew the lid off of that clandestine program, at least in part, revealing sites like Natanz and Isfahan and other places then and subsequently. But the point here being that even as certain places have been revealed, and the IAEA, that's the International Atomic Energy Agency, the monitoring agency for nuclear programs for the United Nations, even as the IAEA is either allowed or not allowed by the Iranian regime to visit sites that it wants to go to. The point is that the real part of the program, the Iranian nuclear weapons program, remains clandestine. Anything that gets revealed openly, maybe or may not be, but mostly opened up to those IAEA inspectors, okay? And they become showplaces like Natanz. That's not where the program is. The program then and now and continuing is in clandestine secret sites that are off limits. And under the original Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action from July 2015, the clandestine program was never even addressed, along with other important topics like Iran's ballistic missile delivery system not addressed, like its regional aggression and a drive for hegemony. That's what the nuclear program is about, by the way. It's to solidify, to cement the Islamic Republic's objective of regional hegemony and beyond, and erasing our number one ally in the region, the Jewish state of Israel, from the face of the map. So my point being that no matter who is selected president in Iran, or even who is president in the United States, that clandestine nuclear weapons program continues, and very likely Iran already has been working on a number of nuclear warheads. We know they have ballistic missiles because that's openly tested, continues to be tested, but that's the point. It doesn't matter so much who is president here or there, as long as that nuclear weapons program remains clandestine and unchallenged by a nuclear deal or any other kind of firm response from the international community in the United States. It doesn't matter a whole lot who becomes president in Tehran.
No, it doesn't matter. I know there's been discussion saying that, Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, really liked the current Raeisi, and that he even had said, if my son cannot be the next supreme leader, he rather see Raeisi be the guy who becomes a lead. I do know that Khamenei is not in good shape. I know that you get elected to be president for 4 years. You cannot be president and supreme leader at the same time. Do you think there's a dynamic here that we can exploit from the U.S. side of the house, depending if Khamenei passes away, whether or not a Raisi or his son would be jockeying for the control of the government, or does his Khamenei's son have enough access and emplacement when it comes to the major military and security force apparatuses in Iran that he might be possibly the next leader as far as the supreme leader is concerned? I don't know if you know a little bit about the dynamics, and how do you think that's going to play out for Iran?
Well, you're absolutely right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right that the current supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, is not in good health, up in his 80s, and in declining health, has been for a while. The discussions about potential succession to him and the jockeying for power, the accompanying jockeying for power that already is going on inside of Iran, has been going on for a while. And in reality, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, of which the Quds Force is a division or a subordinate unit, you might say, already controls the Islamic Republic. And when and if, the Ayatollah Khamenei departs the scene, at some point he will, one way or the other, it is really the IRGC and those loyal to it that will take over in Iran. Now, the current selections that just took place and brought Raisi to the presidency for the next presidential term, and beginning in August. By the way, in Farsi, his name, Rais, means leader. It's kind of interesting. But in any case, where he is considered to be one of the hardest of the hardliners. I mean, you can hardly make these divisions within the Iranian regime. If you're part of the regime, you're a hardliner, period. There really aren't moderates and hardliners. That's a false distinction. But let's call him one of the most devoted of the followers of the Islamic Republic's regime. He came up through the ranks in the judiciary of Iran. As I understand it, he just recently got bumped into a position as an Ayatollah, although he does not have that theological background at all. But then, of course, neither does Khamenei. He was Emir Hojat al-Islam when he got bumped up in 1989 at the death of the Ayatollah Khomeini, his predecessor. He got artificially bumped up to the rank of Ayatollah so he could become supreme leader. Well, we're seeing kind of the same thing happen with Raisi, except that he was not even a cleric to begin with. He was not even a Hojat al-Islam. He just got the title without the study, without the scholarship, without the standing, the theological standing, the background that's usually required for progression up the clerical ranks. He does not have that. But you will notice he does wear the black turban. Now, the black turban on the head of a cleric, a Shiite cleric, in particular, signifies that person claims descent from Muhammad. Now, whether that's true or not, we have very little way of knowing, but he wears the black turban. So all of these things taken together do indicate that he is, and the way that he was promoted to be, the elections in Iran, of course, are all a facade, and they're always engineered, and there's no such thing as free and fair elections in Iran. So it was understood, weeks, months before the actual election date that Raisi would be the chosen successor to Rouhani in that post. But he is obviously the choice of the supreme leader. Now, what happens next and how the succession will go upon the departure from the scene of Khomeini, we shall have to wait and see.
No, you're absolutely right on all those topics. One thing, when you become an Ayatollah, people may not know, I know you know, but people may not know, it opens up the international coffers of money that you could access to, mm-hmm. because there's religious dollars that you can access. So if we give money to organizations, even the United States allows money for humanitarian money to be flown into these religious organizations, so supposed to be on the ground, helping out, whether it be in Gaza or other areas. He will have access to those dollars at his call, regardless, because it opens up the coffers for those international dollars to flow through supposedly international non-governmental organizations, or even any of the humanitarian organizations are working in the region. One thing I do want to kind of look at, Claire, is we know that Iran is going to continue on the path as is. We have relaxed the sanctions on them, although we are striking them in both their proxies in Iraq and Syria. There's no guarantee that that's going to actually have any leverage on the Iranian government, especially if you keep the back doors open. And as we're pulling forces out, even out of Afghanistan, and limiting our footprints within the region. As I said, at least a House now has voted to get rid of the authorization for the use of multi-force, 2002, especially in Iraq, which gives them that footing. I know that Iran is working with China, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to try to expand its footprint, and in this case, expand China, which is a lead of the SCO, within the Middle East, because China cannot maybe expand its footprint using its own military force structures on the ground, but it could easily do it through Iran, which has proxies all over the region in order to pressure against the United States. Tell us a bit about that dynamic. How do you see this thing playing out? I know Iran is in a tough position right now. It doesn't maybe want to be under China's thumb, but it seems that it has no choice because its hardliners have painted it in that position, even though before the election, only 13% of Iranians in the Iranian press said that they would vote. Now they have a hardline president who seems to have a very solid financial relationship, at least with China and the SCO. Tell us a little bit about how do you think this dynamic will play over the next 4 years for this administration that is incoming?
Well, certainly during the Trump administration, very tough, hard sanctions were placed on Iran and Iran's leadership. And particularly after President Trump took the United States out of the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, back in May of 2018, more and tougher sanctions were placed on Iran and its specific leadership figures. It is those sanctions which are now being demanded by this Iranian regime to be removed before they'll agree to proceed any further in the talks that have been going on in Vienna for quite some number of weeks, months now, with the Biden administration begging, groveling, crawling on hands and knees, pleading to be allowed back into that misbegotten deal to begin with. But the Iranian regime is holding fast that all they want really is release from those tough sanctions, which put their economy in a very tough situation. And by the way, the hardest part of those sanctions were really felt by the people of Iran. It's not the leaders who suffered most, or even their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Iraqi Hashd-e-Shabi. They didn't suffer from the sanctions imposed by the United States and others. No, it was the people of Iran who are living in terrible conditions, and then, of course, hit so hard by the China virus as well. But with that on the table as the demand by the Iranian regime, it's my understanding right now, so far, the Biden administration has discussed removal of sanctions, but has not actually done that yet. And at the moment, as I understand it, the talks in Vienna have, what would you say, gone on break for the moment. They have sent the delegates home for the time being, and there is a pause in those talks. But the thing is that to return even to the provisions of the 2015 nuclear accord, Iran would have to, number one, destroy a whole bunch of enriched uranium, which they are now admittedly openly enriching, confirmed by the IAEA, enriching up to the 60% level, which is enough, by the way, to make a nuclear device. Not optimal. Optimal would be above 90% enrichment, but they've got 60%. They'd have to destroy all of that. They would have to destroy, not just unplug, destroy the advanced, modern, faster, better centrifuges that they've been using at Natanz and other places. They're up to IR6, 6 being sort of the generation, 1 to 6. They'd have to destroy a bunch of centrifuges. They would have to open up sites that the IAEA is demanding they be allowed to inspect. None of this is realistic. None of this is going to happen. So it only depends on how fast the Biden administration holds to even the lame, weak provisions of the 2015 accords. As we've said, the talks in Vienna currently are on pause. We don't know when they'll resume, if they'll resume. But I can hardly see the Iranians giving in either on demands for total removal of sanctions or any of those other things I just mentioned, which are completely out of compliance with the provisions of that the 2015 nuclear deal.
No, look, there's a lot of heavy pieces that have to be moved over the next 40 days. We're looking at almost. And I'm not sure how well the Biden administration has thought about how to squeeze Iran, at least since the current Raisi is coming into power, to see whether or not you could even get to a point where you could have a possibly a new JCPOA. Now, I do know also that in Vienna, although we had our negotiators on the ground, there was meetings that our negotiators were physically not in. China actually was a lead in those discussions at times. Can you tell us a bit about that dynamic, and as to do you think that there's just too much pressure from the from China and from the SCO within the region, that we're not going to be able to get to a point where we could, at least over the next 40 days, be able to squeeze the current administration that's coming into Iran? Or if you had to give advice, and I know kind of laid out what are the prerequisites of what has to happen for us to even get to base to talk, what would you recommend we do to at least put enough pressure to see what the reaction would be under the current administration in Iran, to where maybe there would be some opening for us to be able to negotiate?
Well, it's my opinion that we should not be engaged in any sort of negotiations whatsoever with the Tehran regime, period. No negotiations. But there is very little likelihood that the Biden administration will give up its pursuit of negotiations or apply anything near like the necessary pressure against that regime to bring it into compliance, even with, as I called it, the lame and the weak and the watered down provisions of the 2015 Accords. Now, you mentioned China, and with good reason. China has long been a partner of the Iranian regime in its pursuit of nuclear weapons. And that is not changing now and will not change in the near future. If anything, the accord that's been struck between the Iranian regime and Beijing will solidify ties, and that accord, that agreement, is for billions of dollars of Chinese promised investment in Iran for things like infrastructure, roads and railroads and bridges and the like, in return for what China needs, and that is oil. China may not seem likely, but is not an oil-producing country of any size, any magnitude. It simply does not have oil resources, but is, I think, the largest consumer of petroleum resources in the world. And as long as the sanctions remained on the Iranian regime regarding its export of oil in particular, the export of oil from Iran to China was forbidden, was banned. But now, with everything loosening up, this agreement has been reached between the two, and China will get what it needs most, which is oil, and Iran will get what it needs most, and actually more than the bridges and the roads and the tunnels. That's going to be income. It's going to be funding to keep them afloat, to keep the regime in power, and to keep the Iranian regime able to fund its geostrategic ambitions of dominance and aggression. So for China, this means that essentially it gets to extend the reach of its Belt and Road Initiative all the way westward to the Persian Gulf. And I'm sure that's the way it perceives it. I mean, it already had reached Pakistan, and we know that it's building a new port in Gwadar, but now it goes even further westward. And if it follows through on the agreement, will reach through to the Persian Gulf. And yes, as you say, exactly, Sargis, Iran is obliged, is obligated, is put under the thumb of the Beijing regime, the Communist Party of China, by this agreement, but in its case, in the situation it's under, because of the sanctions, because of its economic situation, it accepts the deal.
Well, it did it to itself. It didn't need to paint itself in that position. I know it looks to the West and tries to reach out to the West, but what do you want the West to do for you, when you put yourself in that positions internally where your hardliners, your moderates are hardliners, let alone your hardliners. And it's unfortunate. I don't think the Iranian people really are apt to want to be with China. Maybe the Arab states are much more acceptable of the China influence when it comes to economic development and other monies that flow. I think that the Iranians have always kind of been Western looking, but they're stuck under this leadership. And I don't know if you've ever had a coherent policy for Iran since the Islamic Revolution. I think from my perspective, we just stepped across the board, when Iran decided to go Islamic, and we were still trying to fight Russia. So we decided to, support Saddam at that time as a bloc against Russia. And today, we got more of that communism that was exported out of Russia. They got rid of it and they gave it to us. And we see it sometimes manifesting itself in the decisions some of our politicians make internally in the country, which is not good for us here. With that said, though, is there any way that we can get to a resolution on this issue without having to go to war? I mean, when you're seeing Chinese designed missiles being fired in Gaza against Israel, I mean, it doesn't seem like this thing is changing. The enemy's just becoming much better, much more capable. We got leadership in Israel saying, look, if Hezbollah had joined in and all the missiles were fired against us, we wouldn't be able to block them. That's not good. And this is Israeli military leadership, political leadership admitting to it. It's not like technology is not going to become better when it comes to these type of missile capabilities or how to apply the type of weapon systems that Iran is trying to produce in other areas. We know ourselves, that Iran has capabilities now in Venezuela. The electromagnetic pulse capability is there even for Iran. They have it to an extent that they could use it. Are we just going to have to head down towards war in the future? Is there no other way of us being able to fix this issue?
Well, during the Trump administration, we came a long way toward putting the Iranian regime's leadership in a bind, in a tough position, in a position from which they would have few options other than to curtail their aggression and belligerence, geostrategic ambitions in the region and beyond. Support for Islamic jihad militias. But we'll notice, I think, when there is weakness in the White House, there is chaos in the world. That is a given. And we're watching it play out in front of our eyes. And we're only, 6 months into the new administration here in the United States. We need to go back and take a look at the Iranian Constitution. It's in English, it's online, it's very easy to look up. And we will notice if we do that it spells out very clearly in that Constitution that the Iranian regime is constituted to be a jihad regime with ambitions to establish an Islamic state that conquers the entire world and places the entire world under the rule of Islamic law. The IRGC in that constitution is called an ideological army. And its mission is specifically spelled out to be not just the defense of the Iranian borders, but jihad. And it uses the word jihad. And then in case the message didn't quite get through, the Constitution quotes from the Quran, from verse 860 of the Quran, which says, "Make ready your forces to the utmost of your ability, including steeds of war, to strike terror into the hearts of the enemy." That's in the Iranian Constitution. And it would seem to me the Iranians actually follow their Constitution.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Unfortunately, you don't understand that. As always said, wherever these dictates manifest themselves, you have to confront them regardless. And hopefully, which hope is not a course of action, but hopefully the current administration will understand that and will actually try to fight against it. And every place that these dictates manifest themselves, we confront them. And if need be, we kill them. And try to ensure that they understand that we're not going to put up with any type of aggression against any of our allies within the region. Claire, I'm going to give you the last word on this, and then also tell us where, if people want to read more about you, where they could go and read a little bit more about you and the work you do.
Okay, thank you so much again for having me. And I think we covered a lot of very good topics today. Is a sobering message. It's a message, again, that when the United States stands strong, our allies and friends feel secure. When we do not, when we show weakness, our adversaries and enemies feel emboldened and take more and more aggressive measures until they are stopped. So we can hope that the new administration here in Washington, D.C. will somehow perceive that message and maybe go look up the Iranian Constitution on the internet. For those who might want to follow me, I'm on social media at Clare M. Lopez on Twitter, also on Facebook. And I've just opened a new channel on Telegram, Lopez Liberty LLC. We'd love to have more followers at each of those. My videos, interviews, and writing are posted at places like the United West, Citizens Commission on National Security, and I occasionally, I've got to pick the pace up a little bit, blog at the newsmax.com blog site. I'm a little remiss and behind there, but those are the main places. Also at the American Truth Project, and those would be the major places to find me.
No, that's outstanding. Thank you very much, Claire. And what we'll do is next time we're going to bring you back again. We're going to have all those listed so we can provide that for our readers and listeners. Of course, you're on New Paradigms too, and we'll make sure, because when you speak, it makes sense. You have a way of breaking down exactly what the root cause of the issues that we are dealing with are. America's always been strong. It's just the leadership that has been feckless at times, has put us in a position where we have not been able to fulfill our role as a leader in on the global stage. So it's great to have Americans like you that have served this nation, to include when you were an operational officer in the Central Intelligence Agency. And God bless you for everything you have done, and thank you for your work. And we'll have you back again. This is
Thank
New
you so
Paradigm.
much.